Welcome back to another episode of the Max Stern Podcast. Kyle sits here alongside James Finch, and today we are going through some of the names that have the most trade smoke around them. Already saw one name moved in Chris Kreider from the Rangers, so we'll talk a little bit about that, get into more Rangers potential moves because it seems like the Sal sign is out front and everyone's basically for Sal. So that they're a very interesting team to talk about, but lots of names and smoke, bigger names, lots of young prospects or younger players, I shouldn't say prospects, available. So that's kind of the episode for today. Trade costs, the cost to acquire them, if they need a new contract, the contract that they might be signed to, all that fun stuff, which teams might be able to make sense for a trade partner as well. So we appreciate you listening. Max Stern Podcast available on pretty much all major podcast platforms. Our content, including contract projections at AFP Analytics on X, Blue Sky, Threads. If you're looking to get in contact with us, X is still the primary platform we use. Blue Sky would be second. Threads, not really present, but we try to post some there as well. We have a tip jar through Buy Me a Coffee. Any contributions you want to make to our work is greatly appreciated, and 10% at the end of the off season will be donated to the Rochester Veterinary Clinic Service, Emergency Veterinary Service. Sorry, messed that up a little bit. Only after hours veterinary service available in the greater Rochester area. So appreciate anyone who already has and anyone who is thinking of doing it. So with that, I think we get into this episode. Start with quick thoughts on Chris Kreider because I think it allows us to set the stage for the Rangers kind of offseason and the potential trade targets that might also go out the door with him.
Yeah, so obviously a career Ranger seems like they are really looking to shake things up as well as, or I guess maybe this is shaking things up, clearing cap space. So his $6.5 million cap hit is out the door. They didn't really bring in any money in that trade. Prospect back and they move up, I think it was 15 spots in the draft, third round or fourth to third round or
Fourth to
something.
third, I think it was.
So I guess that's fine. Overall, it feels like a little bit of a cap dump trade, which at this point, I will say that's fine. Obviously, what they end up doing with the money matters. So I don't know if my opinion is fully set in stone here, but for now, I'll say it's fine.
Yeah, Anaheim might have done them another favor here with basically with actually giving up an asset of a level of value for Chris Kreider's full cap hit. It'll be interesting to see where Chris Kreider's what level he's able to perform at, because it seemed pretty obvious and clear that he was dealing with injuries last year. Does that mean he gets back up to where he was? Probably not, but it's not inconceivable. And if he does even come close to the level he was like 2 seasons ago, actually a pretty good deal for Anaheim. If kind of what we saw last season was kind of a sign of things to come, Anaheim not basically giving up assets of value and taking on that contract is not a real smart move. So Anaheim has cap space, but if they want to go big fish hunting, get some of their younger players locked up, that could dissipate pretty darn quickly. So
I think another thing to point out, and well, as you said, it's possible he doesn't fully bounce back, but the Rangers were a poor defensive team, which was one of the issues with Kreider. From a defensive impact standpoint, he was not good last year. He's usually an elite like net front guy, and that was not to the same level this past year. Those two things, though, that could be the player's fault. It could be the team's fault. It's likely a little of both. So it's possible with Anaheim, a new team, new system, maybe there's a little bit of a bounce back there. So the other thought from Anaheim's perspective, really quick on that trade, I think there's a level of logic to, okay, we can make this trade. We didn't give up a whole lot. Is it better to bring in Kreider if he's viewed as a leader, a culture guy, versus signing a bigger name free agent to a much longer deal, potentially blocking one of your young guys already in house from a higher role or developing further? Uh, I would say it depends who that free agent is that you would have tried to sign. If it's Marner, you need to try and sign Marner. If it's someone down the board a little bit more, maybe there's some hesitancy where it's kind of like, all right, we get Kreider for not a whole lot of a cost, and if he's on the decline, he's a good locker room guy to have, and he can play on the third line. If he bounces back, great.
Only 2 years left, 6.5 million cap hit. So I think the point of not blocking and also just not getting into a long-term commitment here is not something to be missed. So it's just
They had a lot of money to spend too,
yes.
so this helps.
Yes, or they should have maybe dipped into the free agent pool as you alluded to. But
I guess they still could.
They still
have like
could.
30 something left, so this helps them inch closer to the floor, really, and they don't have to overpay someone.
It certainly sounds like Chris Kreider will not be the only name moved out of New York. Just run down a few and then we'll kind of decide who we're going to discuss further, who's more likely, less likely here. Keandre Miller's name is out there. I think I saw one of the bigger insiders basically say on a radio hit or something that they expect Miller to be traded. Carson Soucy, acquired last year, along with, was that in JT Miller or was that a separate? I think that was a separate trade.
It was separate because he was with, was he with Vancouver?
He was with Vancouver. I think it was a deadline deal where JT Miller came over before the deadline. I'll stick with that. I'm pretty sure I'm correct there.
Okay.
I don't know why they did that. 2 years left, $3.25 million average annual value. Third pair left shot defenseman. Like that's cap space that they probably didn't need to spend and probably should look to move, but probably not going to be the easiest thing. Will Cooley, I think, is a little less likely, but I wouldn't full on rule him out. He's a pending restricted free agent, needing a new deal. I think we have projected 3 by about 3 to 4 million, somewhere in that range.
3.5-ish. Yeah.
Alexis Lafreniere, another name that seems to be a little bit more smoke as of the last few days around. Still under contract for 7 more years, 7.45 average annual value. That one, we'll come back to him and maybe talk a little bit more there. Braden Schneider, right defenseman, 1 year, $2.2 million. He's, I think, the least. Him and Cooley are probably the least likely to move, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But if the right trade's there, I wouldn't assume that Chris Drury's saying no, he's untouchable. And much like Kreider and Trouba from earlier this year, Mika Zibanejad seems like Chris Drury's going to move on one way or another.
He's going to try to.
This one's a doozy, though. 5 years left, $8.5 million cap hit.
Full no move clause.
Yep. The cap hit, I'm not saying it's great by any means. It's not, in a couple years, it might not be terrible if he can be a decent second line player. It's the 5 years.
Yeah.
At that cap hit that you're, so like Kreider, 2 years, fine. Even if Kreider had the same cap hit, it's probably fine. Zibanejad has 5 years left. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So let's start with Keandre Miller, who seems to be the most likely of these other Ranger players to be moved. Maybe Zibanejad, but I think, let's cover Zibanejad very quickly because I think we can cover and move on. Rangers probably have to attach an asset there.
Yeah. They have to find somewhere he is willing to go.
Yeah. And if they're going to shed that full 8.5 million, they're giving up something pretty nice with that.
Yeah.
First round pick, top level prospect, maybe even a combination of a pick and a prospect, and they would not be of insignificant value by any means. Could even maybe attach one of these other like Miller or Lafreniere with Zibanejad.
Yeah.
Potentially, and that's basically it.
They might get something sort of back, but not of high value. Basically, you attach one of those players to him, you're killing the return for that other player.
Correct. Most likely it would be a probably first round pick and probably a decent prospect if you're trying to get out from the full 8.5 million. And again, as you said, he has to consent to the team too.
Yep. There's already probably a small amount of teams that would sign up, and then he's got to be willing to go to one of them.
If the Rangers were to retain some salary, I think that becomes a little bit different of a discussion.
Yeah.
But it seems like they want to move and clear his entire cap hit, so we'll see what happens there. Now Keandre Miller, left shot defenseman, pending restricted free agent, 2 years from unrestricted free agency. We have short-term projection, just a 1-year deal, qualifying offer, long-term deal, 6x6 basically. I mean, you should be trying to get that done. I would hope a lot of teams are lining up for him.
Yes.
So I guess let's start with what it's going to cost and then can get into some of the teams that might be a decent idea for him. So it's probably going to cost a similar top 4 defenseman level or a younger top 6 forward. Which, if you're trading him for a top 4 defenseman, that's really just you're looking to shuffle the deck, maybe reset the contract timeline a little bit.
Yep.
But really shuffle the deck. If you're looking for a forward, sure, this could make sense as a hockey trade.
Yeah.
What teams do we see as possibilities and who have the assets to meet that price?
So Buffalo's going to be rumored fairly heavily.
They're going to be rumored with pretty much everyone we talk about this episode, I think.
Oh, yeah. A good amount of them, at least. Staying, I guess, towards the bottom of the standings. I would specifically say a San Jose or a Chicago would be a great landing spot. Really, San Jose. That's probably my favorite landing spot.
Yeah.
And they also have a pretty solid selection of young forwards that could be dealt.
Yeah. Yeah, that fit makes a lot of sense. William Eklund could fit the mold of, might be a little bit above, but that could make a lot of sense for both teams there. I wonder about Nashville. I don't know if they have the they do have the assets. They do, but they don't have the assets. I don't know if they have the NHL ready player, but they certainly have some very, very close players, which I know that goes against the price I set, but
I wonder, Nashville's going to have some NHL players that they are willing to move, who all pretty much underperformed last year.
correct.
But there's going to be teams that view those players as good NHL players still. So I don't know. I think there's a possibility that there could be a hockey trade of some kind there. It entirely depends on what Chris Drury is looking for and really his opinion on the Predators who would be available, whether it's a Marchessault, Brady Shea.
Full circle for Shea back to New York.
which I don't know if he accepts that, but I would be hesitant with Nashville just because I could go on and on with Nashville, I guess, but I don't think they should be really trading future assets or young assets.
I don't disagree. I think from a on ice standpoint, it would make some sense for Nashville, but
Yes.
and I mean, if Chris Drury was willing to take Jonathan Marsh's show, well, then absolutely Nashville is signing up for that. But it's are they going to give up like a Molendyke or a Wood or someone like that? And is that enough for Chris Drury to pull the trigger on because he seems to want NHL ready players?
Right.
Any other teams we want to highlight for a potential fit here?
I'm going to say no, but I guess I'll toss out Carolina because you listed them. I don't see that happening whatsoever unless it's an offer sheet.
Yeah,
They're not trading Miller to Carolina.
I think that's fair. I think like in theory, Carolina has the potential young forward asset that New York could be interested in.
So there's the rumors that they don't want to move Miller in the Eastern Conference.
Yes.
I think that's a little strong. I could easily see them, though, saying we are not trading Miller to our division rival who's consistently been better than us.
I think that's the rub there. Yes. I don't, that's the logic that I can't disagree with. I think actually a lot of other reasons that like trade match makes sense, but I think that's the big hiccup there.
Carolina could be an offer sheet team, though.
Yes. Yes.
Very much so. They've got a lot of assets right now from the Rantanen trade. So that I would love that fit with an offer sheet. That'd be fun.
Yeah. With the Rangers clearing this cap space, though, I don't know if that becomes as much of a threat now.
Right.
Susie, I think, is basically a giveaway. If someone wants a an average third pair defenseman, they can probably have him for just about nothing. Cooley, I think that they're looking for similar return as I mentioned for Keandre Miller, except just step that down just a touch, a little bit less value.
Yeah.
That's where if they're looking to bring in maybe a more established forward, maybe that it's kind of a 1-for-1 hockey trade there. Again, Snyder, I don't know how much Chris Drury is going to entertain him as a trade candidate. Which brings us to Alexis Lafreniere. He was really good 2 years ago. Not so great last year. Could be signed to a very reasonable contract or could be signed to a disastrous contract, depending on how you want to look at that. If he can return back to 2 years ago, which I don't think, as you've already pointed out, the fact the Rangers as a team were not great last year, I don't think that's out of the question. Also, given what it was him and Panarin that were basically the only two consistent forwards for a while, at least in the top six.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be a stretch to bet that he could return to what we saw 2 seasons ago, in which case the contract is probably very good. Otherwise you're getting yourself in trouble. But I think if he's getting moved, it's for pretty premium package.
Yeah.
Similar to Keandre Miller, probably top 4 defenseman, similar top 6 forward, maybe need to bring back a pick prospect depending on the level of that forward and age. But what they could potentially do, Miller out for a forward, Lafreniere out for a defenseman, and kind of shuffle the deck that way.
Yep. Chicago would be fun.
That would make a lot of sense.
There's your Bedard winger.
Someone who's shown that they're actually pretty responsible defensively, which Bedard probably could use.
Yes. Contract locks him in.
Yep.
Pretty much there as far as like your age timeline that you would want.
Yeah.
As far as building a core. That's the team I would like to see that happen for.
They have the players to give up. I don't know how in a hurry they'd be willing to give up Alex Vlasic.
I would wonder Korchinski.
That's another interesting name. Would that be what the Rangers are looking for? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's close.
Maybe there probably is another piece or two.
Yeah.
But as a main piece, I would wonder if that's the trade.
Potentially. I think the Rangers would like Vlasic. I don't think Chicago's doing that.
Right.
But maybe. I guess I wouldn't full on rule it out. Anyone else we want to bring, or do we want to kind of use this as a transition here?
Transition.
Because I think another team that's been a little bit connected with both Miller and Lafreniere is Buffalo.
Yep.
Because
pretty much name a Ranger and there's some type of connection with Buffalo.
Yeah, and pretty much name any player and there's a Buffalo connection thrown out anyways.
Yeah, true.
But from the sense that if both teams are looking to shuffle the deck a little bit, a trade between the two teams actually makes a lot of sense. Buffalo having Bo Byram and JJ Peterka, I think that those are both players that have a little bit more value than Lafreniere, and so Peterka definitely more than Lafreniere, and I think Byram a little bit more so than Miller, but that's close.
I think Byram does have more value. It's more a question of should he?
Yep.
But I do think Buffalo is holding the more valuable assets.
So basically what I had rattled off for a return for Lafreniere, that applies to Peterka, except step that up a little bit.
Yep.
I think if Buffalo's moving Peterka, it's for a clear first pair defenseman. Probably right shot. Or someone that's a little bit younger, potential for top four, or showing top four with top pair potential, potentially another asset.
Yeah.
Or clear top six forward. And if it's an older player, Buffalo's probably getting another asset in return. But basically someone to replace Peterka in the lineup, but is more of a veteran.
Yeah.
That's what I see the price as there. Byram, probably swapping out for a similar right shot defenseman, similar level right shot defenseman is the trade that they probably would like to make. He also very easily could get a top six forward. So
similarly to New York, when you're kind of talking use a defenseman to get a forward to get a defenseman, that same logic applies to Buffalo, potentially.
Yep. Except I think Buffalo can, as we mentioned, arbitrage a little bit more value here.
Yes.
Would you do Byram for Lafreniere?
I would.
Because I think that's going to be I think that's going to be out there.
Yeah.
Byram's been connected to the Rangers for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Lafreniere's been connected to Buffalo.
That is one I could see both teams doing. Absolutely, one of them could decide, we're just not that interested. But from a value standpoint, a shake-up standpoint, I think that could make a lot of sense to both sides.
Yeah. It then would allow them to move Peterka in a separate deal.
Yep. Which, in that case, you are then focusing in on defensive help.
Yep. Other targets besides the Rangers for both of these players?
Yeah, so I guess it's very easy to pick the bottom of the league. I would say Chicago should try and be all over Peterka. Doesn't really have the same defensive skill, I guess.
Acumen.
Yeah, there you go. Good word. But still a very good, strong offensive player. So Is it the first target? Probably not. Should it be someone they're interested in? Yes. Nashville, I'd say. Here's one that I want to throw out there that I don't think happens. Pittsburgh, for
Yeah.
both, actually,
Yeah.
both Peterka and Byram. I think Pittsburgh tries to lay low a little bit. Um, but you could also talk me into pushing forward, trying to acquire one of those players to win. Byram wanting power play time. San Jose is another one. That would be a very obvious fit, I think. Philly, maybe. I don't know if he's the style Philly's looking for.
He and Drysdale would be very similar type of players.
Very
Good
similar.
or bad.
Right. I there's your two power play guys,
Yeah.
pretty much. Byram probably looked at between the two as the top guy. But they just need defensemen.
Yeah.
In general, so maybe that works. One team for Peterka that I believe is rumored to at least be interested in him is Calgary.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, that came out today.
Which maybe that somehow lines up for a defenseman.
Yeah, we'll get to Calgary in a minute. They're probably our next. That'll be our transition over in a second, but I've just been sitting here thinking the entire time you were talking about Bedard and Peterka on the same line and getting stuck in the defensive zone.
Oh, that could be very bad.
But then also thinking how electric that could be on the other end of the ice.
Very good.
So I've been just sitting here thinking of like mixed emotions of like highs and lows of like this could be a disaster or one of the funnest things in the league instantly.
Just trade for like, I don't even know. Also get a shutdown defensive forward and just put him on the other wing. Go sign a fourth liner who's elite defensively and just put him on the other wing and let Bedard and Peterka go.
Or just put 3 defensemen out with Bedard and Peterka. Okay, yeah. I'm getting ridiculous now, but that's the type of support they might need is get like 3 stay-at-home defensemen and let those two just run wild.
Pretty much anytime they touch the ice, Vlasic does too.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder about Utah for one or both of these players. I think Peterka more so.
Yeah. I don't know if they would pay the price for Byram. Because they've got a pretty solid defensive core.
Yeah, they have a lot of right shots. So, like, there's an art. If Byram ended up there, it would be very similar to his situation in Buffalo. He's probably behind Sergachev and Durzi as far as power play hierarchy goes. I would assume Michael Kesselring goes to Buffalo, and if probably in either of these trades, definitely needs to be more than just Kesselring.
Yeah,
but that'd be the right shot, probably second pair defenseman that they've been looking for a while. I mean, and probably could play with Dahlin because
anyone can.
I can probably play with Dahlin. Well, maybe I'll get an assist.
You tried to sneak it in there. I don't know if I can let you have that.
I tried.
One. But yeah, pretty much anyone can play with Dahlin. So yeah, that would be the obvious target going back, or one of the obvious ones going back to Buffalo.
The one sneaky team for Byram I wonder about is Carolina. They showed last offseason going and getting both Sean Walker and Shane Gostisbehere that they seemingly were interested in a particular style type of defenseman. Orlov out, potentially. Brent Burns, maybe there, maybe not there. Brady Shea was gone a couple of years ago. I wonder if that's a team that maybe Byram isn't their first target, but if something isn't there, if they circle around, and they certainly have some young forwards that Buffalo might be interested in. I don't know if that's too high of a price, but Like Jackson Blake would make a lot of sense for Buffalo. A
Yeah.
little bit of edge, a little bit of scoring ability. Just Carolina showed they kind of wanted a certain style defenseman. Maybe
Yeah.
they filled that need, but
Well, I think it's Orlov is probably gone. If Burns returns, maybe it's a little less likely, but just looking at the roster and what's locked in, Byram would probably make a lot of sense. I would even say Peterka makes a lot of sense.
he does.
Just goal scoring.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's trading for Gensel. It's trading for Rantanen. It's getting goal scoring.
It's basically getting Natchez on a younger Natchez.
Pretty much.
I would question a little bit the return from Carolina for Peterka, just how that lines up. They have the assets. They absolutely have the assets, but
Is Nikisha not in Carolina long?
that's potentially
Like that's probably what it has to be because Chatfield doesn't do it.
no. Walker Gossesberry
Scott
not do it.
Morrow isn't. He could be a solid NHLer, but that's not the level of player that needs to come back.
No.
So if you're looking for a defenseman for Peterka, it's pretty much Nikishin would need to be on the table.
Yeah.
For Carolina to have a chance.
And I don't know how Buffalo's how interested they would be there. Yeah. It could be like Morrow, and it would have to be and probably a forward at that point.
Right.
So that I think that's the only question there is how that lines up.
Yep.
I think what I would love to see, I think this would be a fun move for both teams. Peterka to the Kings.
Yeah.
For Clark's obviously the dream scenario for Buffalo. I don't know if that's completely unrealistic, but that's probably the dream scenario.
Yeah, it could be Spence and a forward.
Yep.
LaFerriere and Spence for Peterka.
Yeah, that could make sense.
We'd have to. That's something that happens. So really, whenever we talk in RFA, it's probably, well, I guess it could happen at the draft, but a team like the Kings could easily be kind of on hold until they see what happens with Marner.
That's kind of what I was kind of alluding to, depending on how things shake out. Marner, maybe Nikolai Ehlers. Like, you need some of the dust to settle on the big name free agents.
Yeah.
And if they don't land a top forward, maybe they could circle around. So maybe they're too late to the party, because if something's happening with Peterka, maybe Buffalo wants to get it done by the draft. I don't know. I don't think they should feel pressed.
They shouldn't feel pressured, but if there's a deal on the table that they are good and happy with, they probably don't want to wait and then have that fall apart.
Yes, but the draft is like, they don't need draft picks. So
correct.
So it could be it could be a deadline, but not because they need picks in the draft. It could be a deadline because team wants to move elsewhere if they don't accept the deal.
Right.
So one potential player that could make sense going to Buffalo, and you had connected Peterka here, so a little smoke about this. Rasmus Andersson, Calgary. I don't know what his cost is on the trade market. If he's going for Peterka, Calgary's certainly adding more, quite a bit more probably. I think the closest comparable deal I could probably find was John Marino, 2 second-round picks. I think Rasmus Andersson fetches more than that for sure. But how much more, in that he's only got 1 year left, but he's on a good cap hit this year, but he's potentially due for a substantial raise. Conversely, there's some troubling signs in his game.
2 years in a row, poor defensive play.
Yep.
On a good defensive team. I think perception, he probably has to bring back a first.
Yeah.
Or that level of asset, and probably something else.
Yeah.
Which starts to get a little uncomfortable.
Yes.
We're both kind of sitting here like very much hesitant as far as acquiring them. Then
Yeah.
we start talking about the cost. You've also got to pay the contract. Well, yeah, I guess you don't have to. You could be buying him as a rental, but then you're giving up a pretty good asset or two for 1 year of him. Maybe that's fine. I don't know. But that would be kind of the obvious name if they're potentially looking to bring in a forward, especially one like Peterka, Anderson. Just from a roster and needs standpoint, that's the name.
Yeah. Yeah. Montreal's a team that I find interesting for Anderson. Potentially, they could use a right shot guy.
Yeah.
I don't know if they have 2 picks right in the middle of the first round. I don't know if they want a roster player. Maybe it's not quite the fit, but
I don't.
Josh Anderson, does
Yeah,
he have enough value?
I don't think so. I think that's a contract they might be trying to move
So
and can't.
yeah,
I would almost wonder if Anderson is the right kind of defenseman for Montreal.
I'm not saying he has to be.
No, I know. I just mean they might be looking for a more defensive, tougher. I don't want to say he's not tough, but like a
Traditional
little
stay
more
at home.
physical, stay at home
Yeah.
type guy. Um, between Hudson, Matheson, I think both are kind of taking care of your power plays. That's what you're bringing in Anderson for, which a defenseman's a defenseman, a good one's a good one, but maybe they shoot for a. Do we transition here at all?
Probably could. Yeah.
Like a Connor Murphy?
Yeah. Another name on the board.
Yep.
A little bit of smoke around. He probably should come as a slightly cheaper acquisition cost.
He lines up a lot with like the Marino type of.
Yeah.
Which again, only 1 year, so maybe it's not quite 2 seconds,
Yep.
but somewhere in that he's that level of defenseman. He's a John Marino.
Recent defenseman kind of around his level. John Marino, 2 seconds. Brian Dumoulin went for a fourth last offseason to Anaheim. That might have been a little bit more of a cap maneuver, but still a fourth. Or was that at the deadline? Dumoulin was traded twice. Anyways, I think that might have been the deadline for Dumoulin.
Maybe. But even that might be like slightly low.
Yeah. So then you also have Ole Mata and Shane Goss to spare in the past couple of years getting bring back thirds.
Yep.
So that's probably where Murphy should sit, and Anderson in theory probably comes in a little bit higher, but how much I don't know. And yeah, you're looking for completely different styles and like flavors of defensemen. And Rasmus Anderson, Connor Murphy,
Yeah.
those
Very
are
different.
very different. They also might be two of the most acquirable right shot, like top 4 defensemen this offseason. Considering free agent class, and then there's another name or two we will probably get to
Yeah.
here, but considering contract, free agent class, and everything, they might be some of the better options available.
Yes.
So someone looking for a right shot player like a Buffalo, those names are definitely going to be connected there. See, who else did I just want to... Florida's to me could be a very interesting one, especially if Ekblad does end up signing elsewhere for either of these two guys.
Yeah.
Anderson, if Ekblad and Schmidt both sign elsewhere, Anderson could make a lot of sense for the Panthers. A lot of sense. I don't know how they make the assets work there, but they always seem to find a way.
They always have something to give that teams want.
Mackie Samoskevich would probably be someone Calgary would be interested in.
Yeah.
Whether Florida should do that or not, it's a different question, but
right.
Who am I to question Florida these days?
Yeah, that's true. They are kind of the standard at the moment.
Everything they seem to do seems to turn into gold. So,
Yeah.
any other teams we want to highlight for right shot? Nashville really
Um,
needs a right shot. Again, I don't know if it makes sense for them to do something like this, but they could really use a right shot guy.
I don't they could use pretty much anything. Boston's one I think that should be thrown out there if they're still doing this retool, want to
Yeah,
compete. Yoki Haru pretty much came in to replace Carlo at the deadline, and he actually played well with them. So maybe he just returns there.
potentially.
But there could be a hole on the second pair um, with Zadorov.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's who
they're either
Yokiaru
playing
was
with
playing with.
Zadorov or Lindholm.
Yeah,
But Murphy could be interesting there. Even, I guess, Anderson could be.
I think we probably, before we get too much farther into this episode, hit on a couple more of the big names where there's smoke. The Marco Rossi, Minnesota. We'll go there
Yeah.
first.
I mean, that's just in general a weird situation. That's a player that they've been looking for years, pretty much.
Yeah, a top six center.
Yeah. So wanting to move him is odd. Now he's a smaller center, which in general there are teams that don't like smaller players. There are teams that really don't like smaller centers. Then there's the Minnesota Wild who tend to play a little bit of a heavier game. So I guess from that specific point of view, sure, maybe Rossi isn't the best fit, but he is also a clear top six center. Provides the offense that you were looking for out of that position. It's very odd that that's something they would move on from.
Basically, if they're looking to send, if they do send him out, they're going to be looking to get a similar player back who's probably just taller.
Yeah.
Like I think their ideal return is basically a top six center.
Yeah, they just want a different one. I don't the only trade that like to me could make some level of sense that I've seen just speculated is Pedersen.
Yes,
That could make some sense.
but that's a pretty hefty price to give up for Pedersen.
Yeah, you're acquiring a much pricier player who's a little bit unknown at the moment.
Yeah, with term too, to be clear.
Yes. Just looking at our list, this is a player we weren't really going to talk about. We don't have to talk about him specifically much, but Braden Shen kind of sticks out as someone who could, in theory, play a top six role
Yeah,
and play a little bit of that bigger, heavier style. But I'm not really trading Marco Rossi for Braden Shen.
no,
So I don't. I almost wonder if he ends up moving, or it might be a situation where they have to have that second deal lined up.
I think that's more it. Is I think they'd be very hard pressed to find a similar top six center back in a one for one type swap. But I could see them being able to move out. I don't know who else they move out to get that top six center. Like in theory, it would be a D that would make the most sense.
Yeah.
But is it going to be Byram? Is it going to be Faber? Yurchek?
The other thing I would say, Frank Saravalli put out a trade board. The Athletic put out a trade
Chris
board. Is it
Johnston?
Chris
Yeah,
Johnson's?
yeah.
So, two top insiders, two trade boards. Who's the other top six center that they're going to acquire? If it's not Pedersen.
I have all the I have went through all the trade boards and I have no one in front of me.
So it's pretty much like maybe they can make Shen work.
Yeah.
Does St. Louis trade him to Minnesota? I don't know.
I mean, if they can get Marco Rossi, they're probably fine with that.
Right,
But
but let's say this is it might be more of a Rossi goes out and then they acquire the player in a different trade. If I'm St. Louis, I don't know if I'm trading my captain to a division rival.
Yeah.
There's Pedersen, which we mentioned, like there's high risk, high reward would be what that move is, pretty much.
Yeah.
Zibanejad. But are you acquiring what you're looking for? No. I don't think so. I guess it depends what you're looking for, but what everyone thinks you're looking for, Zibanejad doesn't do that.
I
So
mean,
like I don't Morgan Geeky's more of a winger at this point.
yeah. I think the only
Charlie Coyle?
Charlie Coyle, JJ Pajot. The other thought here is you ship Rossi out for a high end winger like a Peterka.
Yeah.
And stick with kind of this three centers you rolled out in the playoffs, which would have been Eriksson, Hartman, and
Was it Goudreau?
Freddie Goudreau.
Yeah.
Were they really playing Freddie
Trennan?
Goudreau? Trennan, maybe.
As we look up this name, I think the point should be obvious
Yeah.
here. The point that we're making.
Yes. Yeah, I don't even remember who they were rolling out.
They didn't trade for a center.
Because the only other centers they have are Trennan.
It might have been Marcus Johansson.
Maybe.
If they were playing him down the middle.
Maybe.
Yeah, so you're looking at like the Eriksson, Hartman as your 1-2.
Cap wages depth chart. Freddie Goudreau.
Okay, yeah.
And then they had Marco Rossi on the fourth line.
Yep.
Between Trennan and Brazeau. So yeah, I mean, again, they could stick with this, have one legit center in Eriksson. Hartman's absolutely fine on your third line as a center. Absolutely fine. But I don't know. I personally would not be looking to acquire a top six winger. I think there's a need there. Like, they were rolling out Marcus Foligno on the second line in the playoffs. And Gustav Nyquist probably out as well. So, like, they have a need at winger. Kaprizov, Boldy, elite first line wingers.
Yep.
Matt Zuccarello, still shockingly pretty darn solid on the second line. But they certainly could use another winger there. And then, hey, maybe a Hartman makes sense to roll out between, just say Peterka and Zuccarello, but I would be shooting higher. I think you would be shooting higher.
Yep.
I wouldn't necessarily be trading Rossi. I'd give him a 7x7 contract and move on and actually have a top six center locked up. But that's me.
No, I fully agree.
The other big name that I can't believe, I don't know which one I can't believe there's smoke around more. Marco Rossi or Jason Robertson.
For me, I can't believe Rossi more.
I think I agree with that.
Robertson's more of just, he's so good you'd think he would be part of the long-term plan. I think that really came into question when they made the Rantanen trade. They don't have to trade him. I think that should be the first thing whenever anyone is thinking about this, has a conversation about what Dallas is doing. They don't have to move him. He could play out next season and he's still an RFA. There's other ways that they could clear money. Money that really shouldn't even be tied up in what it's tied up in the first place.
Let's get that out of the way first.
So a couple other players that could be on your trade board at home, Ilya Lyubushkin and Matt Dumba, I think could both be mentioned.
Well, if they're on your trade board, I hope it's a trade board of players you don't want your favorite team acquiring.
Yeah, trade board as in like, I could see those guys getting traded.
Yeah, that's about it.
Both deals we were critical of when
Very
they were
much so.
signed.
Yeah.
Now they're in a situation where one of those players at least could easily be moved to clear space.
I think they ideally would like to move both to clear space.
Yeah.
Lyubushkin might have enough value that they could maybe get a late round pick back.
I think they would get a late round pick for both.
Potentially.
I think spinning it from play to just intangibles, I could see Dumba having value.
I don't know. That one's tough because he's kind of flamed out the last two spots he's been.
Yeah, I just wonder if someone brings him in as like a we need NHL defenseman and he's good locker room leader kind of guy.
Maybe. But so those are that would clear, quick math here, $7 million in cap space, which is basically Jason Robertson has 1 year, $7.75 million left. So you could try and get out of those two defenseman deals or trade one Jason Robertson. Robertson, I would imagine the cost is probably very similar to what Dallas gave up for Rantanen, but it's probably a little bit more because he's younger and there is some control there. So probably a top prospect or an established young forward. First round pick for sure. Probably another prospect and another first. Then probably 2 to 3 more lower level type things, whether they're second, third round picks or B type level prospects. So we're talking probably Peterka, a first, and 2 more picks if Buffalo's acquiring Robertson. And I wonder if Dallas is even interested in that because of the amount of money they would have to pay Peterka. But that's kind of the level of player that they're looking for back.
Yes. I don't know if Dallas would do this, but this is the player Chicago should be after.
Yeah.
Like this is the top number one target for Chicago, at least in trade. But I would argue even if they could sign a Marner or an Ehlers or a Besser, they should still be trying to make this trade.
Yeah.
So again, I in a way maybe it's a little boring to keep picking those bottom teams, but Robertson is exactly what Chicago needs.
San Jose as well.
San Jose makes sense in general. Yes, they have the assets to do it for sure. And if they just want to get better around their centers, yeah.
Can we construct a Rangers trade here real quickly? Talk out a Rangers trade.
Whether you would want to target Keandre Miller or Braden Schneider, both could make a level of sense defensively. I would be curious what forward comes back.
So my question was going to be, is Lafreniere appealing enough?
I don't know.
Because it's not solving Dallas's salary issue.
Which I think is the real...
But it also kind of is because it's a long term.
True.
But you're clearly getting a worse forward.
Yes. Well, you're pretty much bringing in a player in the same ballpark as Robertson's current money. But we'll have another 6 years.
but won't need to give a $4 million raise to next season.
Exactly. For the next half decade. Maybe. And I think he's sort of, I guess he fits the traditional Dallas play style, but Dallas play style could also change a little bit. We don't know that for sure. I don't know if that's enough. Or maybe enough's not the right word, but I don't know if that's the deal that wins.
Yeah. I don't know if Gabe Perreault's a high enough value prospect either. Like, we might be talking Lafreniere, Perreault, and Keandre Miller is your starting point.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if that's enough, but the fact that the Rangers now have cap space and Robertson would be a very nice idea for them. I don't think I didn't want to completely gloss by it, but I don't know if I see a value match there.
Yeah.
Could you see Carolina?
Oh, absolutely. Like,
basically,
just hand back everything they acquired. Not everything. That would be awkward. They're not giving back Stankoven, but like Jackson Blake.
Yeah.
Even then, though, this starts to get a little like, is it the deal that gets done? So they have firsts, which maybe some of that is what Dallas wants. Maybe they want some of those future
picks
pieces,
back. Yeah.
Whether it's prospects or picks. But defensively, what does Carolina send? Is it Nikishin? Is that what Dallas wants, or do they want the for sure established defender back?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess it really, there's teams that could absolutely just overload Dallas with a bunch of assets, but are they just looking to clear money, have a bunch of assets, or are they looking to kind of turn Robertson into multiple NHL pieces now? Depending on the answer to that, really includes or excludes a bunch of teams.
Let me throw out one other team here for Robertson. Washington.
Yeah, I would love that, and I think they could do it.
They certainly have the young assets to start that conversation.
There's forwards, there's defensemen.
Yeah. And they have an abundance of both.
Yeah.
Ryan Leonard, the starting point?
Could be, but you could also look at a Connor McMichael.
Maybe. Yeah.
Which, another situation where he probably is going to be getting a deal soon. In that same ballpark, though, of where Robertson is at now, not needing the extra 4, 5, 6, whatever it ends up being raised.
Yeah.
Defensively, they're loaded.
Yes.
So, is it a Rasmus Sandin? That would be an interesting name. He had a real solid season last year. Yeah. That team would make a lot of sense. That's pretty much the Ovechkin replacement.
Yeah.
But
would you be willing to move Protas for Robertson?
Yes.
Because that for me, if I'm Dallas, that's a very attractive name. Very, very good.
Yes.
Established young NHL forward on one of the best value contracts in the league.
Yep.
So
I personally would be willing. I'm not excited to do that by any means, but there's not a lot of names that I think you can really hold and say are off limits when you're trying to acquire someone like Robertson.
Yeah, that's certainly fair.
The return is probably not as significant from a quantity standpoint if it's a player like Protas.
Yeah.
Because as you said, one, he's very good, he's established, and he's on a great contract. So now your 2 roster players and a couple good draft picks turns into maybe one roster player and a couple draft picks,
Yeah.
or two roster players and one draft pick. It's between the teams we mentioned, that is probably the best asset that, arguably the best asset that could be moved.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like even Peterka, let's say they were to send back Peterka, well, you got to pay him.
Yes.
So from a pure value standpoint, the contract Protas is on probably puts his value higher.
I think the same can. So Ryan Leonard is on an entry level, a little less established,
Yeah.
but that's another, like, I don't know how many other teams are able to put that level of player, are going to be that willing to potentially put that level of player on the table.
Yeah.
And Washington, again, they're not thrilled to do that, but they have enough other players and prospects that they could.
And I would, just to be very clear, there's not a scenario where it's Leonard and Protas as your two NHL players. Washington's not doing that.
No,
just to be clear, because
we're
mentioning both guys, but
yeah.
they would not both be part of a deal there. That's too much.
Any other names that we wanted to? I mean, we got plenty more highlight, but we're not going to get to all the ones that we wanted to highlight.
I guess really quick, maybe just highlighting a couple goalies that are likely to be talked about.
Yeah.
Really out west. There's some other names that could pop up, but the two big ones are out west. John Gibson and Thatcher Demko. Both could honestly probably fetch a very similar return.
Yeah.
Demko having the higher ceiling.
Lower, but also the lower floor potentially.
Yes.
Good or bad, only 1 year left on Demko's contract, 2 on Gibson. We've seen enough similar level goalies traded in the past couple seasons. Markstrom, Allmark are probably the two best comps here. Both of them went for a first and a decent roster player, not top end, but middle of the lineup type player. That's probably what both Gibson and Demko are going to return. Obviously, that can be tweaked around a little bit, but that's kind of the parameters that you're probably working off of. Either a pretty good prospect who would be classified like a first or first round pick, then a NHL established middle of the lineup type player.
I look at like that Markstrom trade a lot with Gibson.
Yeah.
I don't know if Gibson gets quite as much, but you're pretty much looking at like a solid prospect and a first. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Potentially.
2 years left.
Yes.
Gibson probably not as good at this point as Markstrom was.
It's close.
It's close. Well, maybe
close.
Perception, I more mean. Markstrom was perceived to be like a top 7 goaltender at the time.
Yeah.
Markstrom also had retention in his deal too.
Yeah, fair.
So getting pretty much Kevin Ball in a first, what does Gibson get? Probably around the same ballpark. As far as destinations, which I like this team for both of these players. Well, I guess really quick, I'll say I think Gibson moving is more likely than Demko. But I don't know if it's not to say Demko's unlikely.
I don't know if I think both are very likely to be traded this offseason.
It wouldn't shock me if either.
Demko, if you're Vancouver, I don't know if you can commit a contract to him this offseason. And realistically, if you're not going to trade him, you probably should commit that contract. So therefore, to me, the logic is you probably should trade him.
If I'm Vancouver, I move him.
Yeah.
If the contract's good enough for them that they're fine with him and Lankinen, both deals, that could actually make a lot of sense.
Yeah, but then you also probably have to be okay with him walking next year for nothing.
Well, no, if he signs a new deal, like if you're either trading him or signing him to an extension, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
But so a team that I think should be after both of these guys, not acquiring both, but interested in both, Columbus. And I like Gibson a lot for Columbus because they could also send back Merzlikins.
That makes sense because Anaheim, Dostal should be their clear one.
Yeah,
starter
at this point, yeah.
But looking, they have a couple other interesting names in their pipeline, but no one that I'm, especially if you already went out and got Chris Kreider as Anaheim, like you're clearly trying to take a step forward. I do want another NHL established goalie with Dostal.
Yeah.
And Merzlikins makes sense. Or with the
You would save $1 million.
Then
he's 5.4, Gibson 6.4.
That
they save $1 million. It's 2 years for him as well. So Gibson 2 years, Merzlikins 2 years. So pretty much you're saving $1 million each season. Money's not really an issue at this point. They're going to have some younger players to pay the next couple of years, but this deal shouldn't really impact them in a way where all of a sudden they can't sign anyone. So I would almost wonder if this would help them also maximize the return for Gibson, taking money back.
Maybe. Look at the Allmark deal to Ottawa. I don't know. So
True.
Because basically the parameters you're laying out is the Allmark deal. Where because Boston took back Korpisalo, which was not a great contract.
No.
So, it's not 100% the same because Allmark was going to be he's better, but also only had a year left and needed a new contract, and I think kind of limited where he was willing to sign that contract. So there's factors there, but I think that's kind of the trade you're building off of if you're doing a Merzlikins for Gibson type swap. So Anaheim's probably getting a first and Merzlikins, and again a middle of the lineup type player probably.
Yep.
I forgot Mark Kalistic, I think.
Yeah.
Went to Boston in that deal. So.
Yeah.
But I the idea is not bad by any means.
As far as contenders, I don't, other than Columbus, who I will say to me, like they are pushing for the playoffs. So I don't know if there's a better team that is going to need a starting goaltender.
Detroit, maybe. I guess they did end up with Mrazek.
Is Detroit better than Columbus?
That's not how long of an episode? How much more time we got?
I was gonna say that's not actually the point we're trying to make here. I was more saying that for fun, but
I'm throwing teams in a similar tier,
yes.
And to me, Detroit's maybe the other one.
Yeah.
Again, they got Mrazek back. Talbot a free agent, or is he one more year?
I think he's one more year. I think they're going to have Mrazek and Talbot.
But
so do they send one of them out in a different deal, maybe?
Or Anaheim can get Talbot.
Yeah,
that would
make sense.
That would make a lot of sense for Anaheim.
Yeah, so I guess maybe Detroit. And there's teams further down the list, or down the standings, I should say, that could use a goalie. Buffalo could use a goalie.
Potentially,
Not necessarily a clear starter, though.
Demko for Buffalo makes a little bit more sense because he only has a year left. He could be someone that they are okay giving up a pretty nice asset for and also find it attractive because it would be a 1-year rental.
Yeah.
But they could absolutely use potentially a goalie to pair with Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen to allow Devin Levi one more year down in Rochester in the AHL, kind of like Calgary did with Dustin Wolf. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the trajectory you're kind of trying to follow there. Philly needs a goalie bad.
They do, but do they want to be good? That's the question. Which I guess it's not to say a goalie all of a sudden makes them good. I don't think that's the case. They'd be a lot better.
Yeah.
But I just wonder, is this the year they try and make that move, or do they wait a year? I don't know.
Yeah.
But they very badly need a goalie. It's arguable they don't have an NHL caliber goalie.
And then Pittsburgh as well, potentially.
Another team that very much could use one, but are they looking to make that move this offseason?
Yep. Any other names highlight quickly or?
I guess just quickly because it's interesting. Necas could very well be available again. I don't even know. I don't want to say specific teams necessarily. It's a situation where I almost wonder if he just wants to hit UFA and decide himself.
That's the vibe I'm getting.
So you're probably trying to acquire him because you're contending now or really wanting to make a push right now. I don't think it's a move that necessarily makes much sense for like a San Jose or a Chicago unless you're paying up big time right now. So yeah, that's just kind of an interesting one because they just acquired him and might have to end up moving him again.
Yeah. Charlie Coyle, also a name in Colorado that's kind of
similar
out there. Sam Girard as well, just mentioning those.
Yep.
But I think we'll call it there. Maybe we'll squeeze in one more episode on trades before kind of the draft and free agency starts, or we might have enough other topics that we do want to cover. But I think those are the big names, at least right now, where it seems like there's the smoke. So just kind of, I had pulled together the rankings from Chris Johnston's from TSN and Frank Saravalli's from the Daily Faceoffs rankings.
Chris Johnson from The Athletic.
What did I say?
TSN.
Well, from both, I guess. They live on The Athletic. He appears on all the TSN panels as well.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah. So just kind of going through the rankings real quick, the aggregate average. First on the board was Chris Kreider, already gone. So next would be Marco Rossi, followed by Bo Byram, JJ Peterka, Anderson, Gibson, Robertson, Daily Faceoff 7. Chris Johnston hasn't updated with him on there yet. Jonathan Marchessault, we touched on very, very briefly. Keandre Miller. Then like Coyle, Pajot, Isaac Howard as a prospect to move. Erik Karlsson, Vladimir Tarasenko, Nick Robertson, Connor Murphy, Shen. I think that's reading enough names. You can go find them. But we covered most of the top ones. And I think I wanted to highlight that because the ones we talked about, a lot of these guys who do end up towards the top of these boards are not there. They're there for a reason. I'll phrase it that way.
Yeah.
Chris Kreider was the aggregate number 1 and gone.
Yep.
Trade-wise.
It's usually the guys there's a lot of noise around.
Yeah.
And I guess the whole where there's smoke is there fire. This is generally a time where when guys are ranked very highly by multiple insiders, there's probably some fire.
So Rossi and Byram are next up. So with that, appreciate you listening. Max Stern Podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. Content, including contract projections on X at AFP Analytics. If you appreciate our content, our tip jar, buy me a coffee, available through our pin post, I should say, on X, and Blue Sky, and our link tree as well. Appreciate any contributions, and with that, we will talk to you next time.